All right. Howdy, folks. My name is Ethan Herman. Today I'm going to be walking you through creating a couple rudimentary, sort of primitive visual representations of Excel data in Tableau. So the first thing you want to do actually, once you've gotten your source file sort of somewhere readily accessible, like your desktop, you want to sort of do some cleanup. I've actually already opened this up, taken a look at it, and cleaned up this data. There were some sporadic entries, text-based data in column M, which wouldn't necessarily, in fact, it probably would have contributed negatively to my Tableau spreadsheet. So I sort of just cleared out the entirety of row M. Now this is uniform. So once you've got that sorted out, step one is to actually open up Tableau. Then we're going to go ahead and click and drag our source file into Tableau. Now we don't have to worry about left, right, inner, or outer joins because we're only working with one worksheet here, which sort of makes things a little less complicated. Tableau is useful for creating taking boring things like this and creating pretty things like this with some interactive functionality built in. So this is actually our reference. This is essentially what we're going to be building today in its entirety, identically. This is one that I've done or had done earlier. So let's go on over to sheet 1. Now to create this sort of map takes a couple steps. So you'll see longitude and latitude already parsed here. If you drag countries in the columns and then hit show me, then select the map, it'll bifurcate coordinates or longitude, latitude for you automatically, which is perfect. We do have them down here. We could have just manually dragged that. That's weird. That's actually, yeah, that's weird. All right, so for total deaths, this map actually shows how many people in each country died from COVID. I will note this is a super incomplete data set for some socio-political reasons that I'm not going to get into, sort of outside the scope of this video, not really for me to touch on there. But some of these countries' values are super underinflated. Although America looks about right. So for all intents and for the purposes of this video, this data set is just fine. This will do. So we're going to go ahead and drag total deaths to color. Now by default, the gradient that Tableau uses is this light blue to slightly darker light blue. You might already be familiar with retrograde and diverging, but this would be a bad choice because these values are arranged left to right to ascend or from descending to ascending order, left to right, respectively. So red would actually be bad because that would be sort of suggestive of the idea that the fewer deaths a country has experienced, the better, which is not like the correct visual correlation we want to make there. So there is no green to red as far as I can tell. So we're gonna actually hit custom diverging and then select the appropriate colors. We've got green and red going on, hit apply, then okay. And now we've got this. We're still missing some of the hover over sort of elements, the HUD elements there, some functionality. So we need total population or population and total cases. So we're going to go ahead and drag population to detail and then total cases to detail. That way, when we hover over the USA, for instance, we got the aggregate population, the total cases, and total deaths, which is identical, or not identical, for some reason. Population, total cases, total deaths. Huh. Never mind. I'm tripping. It is the same. Okay, so the map is finished. We're actually going to go ahead and create two graphs sort of showing kind of the same thing. When we're done making the graphs, we're going to consolidate everything, the map, both graphs, onto a dashboard. which is super squished, but it looks something like this. So let's move this back to half, just like that. Now we're going to go ahead and rename this map because that's what it is. And then hit this button to create a sheet. I'm going to preemptively rename this graph 1. Now for this graph, it's kind of squished, so let's expand this. What this graph shows is we've got the countries over here in a column, followed by these three columns, laterally, sort of horizontally arrayed bar graphs. These exist on the same axis. So essentially what that means is that these three fields are three interrelated dimensions. Basically, these data sets have relationships or help us understand like the relationship between, let's say, a country's total population and how many people came down or contracted COVID, and then out of those, the people who actually came down with it, how many of them died. So it's like a threefold sort of ratio here. This can be pretty meaningful. I find this personally pretty visually easy to parse just because it is very lateral, it's very sideways, sort of follows the natural inclination to read from left to right. So let's actually go ahead and reproduce this graph, and then like I said, we have a pretty similar one using different metrics. Now, when we're making this graph, one of the things that I messed up the first time was, you'll notice we have these 4 individual tabs, all meaning all of this data, or these dimensions, some, and then we have the individual constituent dimensions, where let's say we wanted to add a color gradient to total deaths, we would go down here and take total deaths onto color, and hey presto, voila, we've got a color gradient for total deaths. Notice that the other 2 dimensions remain unaffected. That's because we're on this. Now, if we had gone to all and hit total deaths, move that to color, then color would affect all of them. This is bad because, I mean, saying that a higher aggregate population is not a good thing, is that in and of itself is not a particularly useful or even, strictly speaking, a true statement. So we wouldn't want this under all. We would want the color gradient under just total cases and total deaths. We don't really need a gradient for population because we're not comparing these individual data points unto themselves. We're relating them to 2 other dimensions, which is, we've already got essentially what I just described on the map. Or actually, just kidding, no we don't. Forget what I said. So let's go ahead and reproduce this. Both of these graphs actually. So let's hit Command Z for that. All right, so we're gonna want color, not on this one, but on these 2. So we've got total population, total cases, and total deaths up in columns, total cases and total deaths. Let's do this in the same order as we did over here, just for cogency's sake. And then hit country in rows, hit show me. We've already got that. All right, so we need to go to total cases and total deaths and add color. Now you're going to want to make sure that when you're adding these to the tooltip, or not to the tooltip, to the color aspect, you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate, that you're actually employing the appropriate table. Because if you had dragged total deaths to total cases, you're going to be applying an incorrect quantitative sort of metric to define your spectrum, your gradient. That's sort of disparate. It doesn't agree with, it's in disagreement with the actual values under total cases. So let's take total cases, drag that to color, and then total deaths, total deaths. Let's go ahead and maximize this real quick. And then under total cases, we'll do the same thing we did earlier with the custom color gradient. So let's select, nice shade of red, hit OK, hit OK, and then do the exact same thing over here. Green, OK, and then red, OK. Now next we're going to, this actually looks pretty good. The grays, obviously these do look different than the gray is not exactly blue. It's not the same thing. But for the purposes of this demonstration, it really doesn't matter all that much. You'll notice that, yeah, so this is all color-coded now. What we've got going on here is, like I said earlier, this shows us sort of the relationship between a given country's total or aggregate population and essentially how well they handled COVID. Sort of has to do with recovery rates. So moving on to graph 2, let's go ahead and create another sheet, call this graph 2. Oops. So for graph 2, what we've got going on here is one of the differences between, well, essentially graph 2 is graph 1, but scaled down. So differentials in values become increasingly more pronounced. These are total cases, total tests, and total deaths per 1 million population. So essentially per mil, per capita. Same concept, except instead of per every 1,000, it's for every 1 million. So let's see, we need total cases, 1 mil population in columns, total tests, 1 mil pop, and then total deaths, 1 mil pop in columns, and then we've got country in rows. Now we're actually going to add some color to all 3 dimensions, actually. Just because graph 2 doesn't have a population metric, because, well, it's kind of redundant. We've already established that. Anybody who wants to know, in fact, if they can actually just check the map, they can just consult this. Let's see. So we're gonna actually go ahead and add color gradients to all 3 of these. So for, again, this is under all. So like I said earlier, this is where this sort of functionality comes into play. Instead of, we don't have to go case by case. We can just apply. Actually, no, we do have to go case by case. So for total cases, we've got total cases 1 mil pop under color, and then tests. Again, remembering to choose the appropriate table. So for tests 1 million or per every 1 mil pop, we're going to use the same table. And then deaths, total case or total deaths 1 mil pop color. All right, and then we can actually go ahead and just change this color gradient as well, just so it's a little bit easier to sort of understand at first glance. Custom diverging, get green, and then red. Apply. Okay. Let's do the exact same thing here. Whoops. Green, and then red. Okay, and then do it a third and final time. God, this is boring. Green and red. Okay. Okay. So now we've got this color-coded graph indicating, essentially, you should expect to see some kind of relationship between the number of total cases and total tests. And then to a lesser degree, some relationship should be sort of like a U-curve, inverted or upright. So it would be reasonable to assume that the more cases a nation has, the more tests they should have, depending on their infrastructure and what their actual like healthcare capacities are. And then that'll help you sort of understand the relationship between these two and deaths, which the more cases a country has, it should naturally follow consequently then that there should be more tests, followed by potentially, arguably, fewer deaths because they've employed greater preventative measures. Now, some of that is actually offset by aggregate population. That can have definitely have some influence over that conjectured relationship. But so anyway, so that's graph 2 done. And then let's actually move on to the dashboard for our final element here, which is essentially just including the map and then both graphs. So that's actually a sheet, so let's get rid of the sheet. Hit this button to create a dashboard. And then we're going to drag the map over to the left-hand side because we want it to occupy the most amount of real estate space. We're going to drag graph 1 to right up here, or right over here, and then graph 2 on the same side directly, nope, underneath it, please. Perfect. So that's, come on. Okay, well that's weird. There we go. So let's just resize these real quick. That is very strange. Oh, actually, that's because I forgot. You want to change the resolution up here to automatic rather than fixed size or range, because this will severely limit the actual dimensions, the size of the dashboard. So you want automatic. There we go. So now we've got everything displayed at full tilt, full size. We can move this back. So we're actually going to include a couple filters here, but I don't quite remember how to do that, so I will pause the recording and then return later after I figure that out and splice the footage.